I mean, I wouldn't mind. I'm quite interested in seeing what a video of a conversation like this looks like on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, people talking about things they're interested in. That's what YouTube's about. So let's give it a try.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce this. Hi guys. Hi everybody. My name's Hamish Sewell, and I'm talking today to Rob Walton from the wonderful geolocated project called Vanitas, which is just recently finished at the Caloundra Cemetery here on the Sunshine Coast as part of the Horizon Festival. And I've invited Rob to have a chat with me today because I think there's some really important elements of Vanitas which I wanted to explore with Rob. And I'd love this as a document, I suppose, of one of a number of projects which are now going out there that I think are really noteworthy and worthwhile exploring. And just, Rob, I'm not sure about you, but I don't think a lot of people have the language to talk about a lot of this stuff yet. What's your opinion on that?
That's true. I think lots of these kinds of projects are approached by people from lots of different disciplines. Because they converge on the smartphone. The smartphone itself is a convergence device. Nobody knows quite how to approach this properly because it's literally an interdisciplinary space. So that's where so many people are trying different things out and feeling around at the edges to see how these things might work.
Now I'm just going to grab my questions. What do I do with the bloody things? Here they go. Okay. So, Rob, just briefly, can you just give us a context to who you are, where you belong, and how you got involved in Vanitas?
Yeah, okay. So, I live in Melbourne, Australia. I am not from Australia, but I am a citizen now. I moved here in 2011. I started working with Arts House to figure out how to make a project where people who make things with mobile devices, that I call itinerant artworks, could kind of somehow get together and have a bit more support to make work in that mode. Lots of people I've noticed over the years have made audio works, or audio walks, or mediated walks, and they were often on the periphery of people's main, so-called main practice, especially in theatre, which might be studio-based practice. But lots of people experiment around the edges, so I thought, well, let's see if we can make an opportunity to put this kind of experimentation central and find a way for venues to support that in a particular way. So I worked with an arts house in the city of Melbourne to create this project called In Your Hands, which we fundraised for, and the Australia Council funded, and that project paid for 4 experiments to be made by 4 different groups of artists and programmers, and it led to a suite of 4 works, of which Vanitas was one. And so Vanitas is the project that I ended up making, which is the project that I created with Jason Mailing and my other collaborators, which is now at a stage where it can tour, and it's touring in Australia and hopefully going to go internationally as well. And that's a work, I call it an artwork for smartphones and cemeteries.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think you're using the term, it's an app to die for, which brings us to cemeteries. I mean, yeah. What is it about cemeteries that sort of appealed to you with this format?
Well, the whole way it was made through an inquiry-based approach. I come from a site-specific performance background, making things in response to places. And in a way, the actual site of this work, the site that I was exploring, was actually the smartphone. That's what the start was. And the first iteration we made of Vanitas wasn't in a cemetery at all. It was in North Melbourne. And I became obsessed with this florist shop that was abandoned. It had been abandoned for 2 years, but all the flowers were just left on. It's like somebody left, left at the end of the day. All the flowers just packed up the shop as they normally did, but then never went back. And no one went back for 2 years. So all the fresh cut flowers wilted. On the window was like this Vanitas, and that's where the term Vanitas came from, which is a reference to 16th century Dutch painting, this idea of capturing life in the moment of wilting. But we made this app-based work that took you to this beautiful shop, but of course that was going to close or be sold or move on at some point. And I lived in paranoia that it would be moved before the end of this performance. But then we'd always talked about other places as well that we'd like to do this work in, at botanical gardens and in museums and art museums. And then we moved it to a cemetery, which is another one of the places where we're interesting, because that's another place where flowers go to die, just like humans. So we moved the whole thing to a cemetery, and because we wanted to be able to go to any cemetery anywhere in the world, we carefully designed it so different parts of it remain the same everywhere, whereas other parts change slightly and are specific to that space. So it's a double kind of inquiry. The first is into the smartphone, and the second is into the cemetery itself. And that's how we got into cemeteries.
Cemeteries is a sort of generic experience as opposed to a site-specific experience.
That's right. So it's an interesting... One of the things we realised was it's about the quality. There's quite a lot of things we realised, but what's interesting, I think, is in our experiments we used to send people to very specific locations in our cemetery that we were working with, which is Melbourne General Cemetery. And we wanted people to go to the amazing, cool places that we'd found that are really like beautiful or barren or historic. But then once we started sending people map locations, it confused people quite a lot, and there was just one too many thing going on. So what would happen is they'd have to switch out of our app, switch into text message, press a link in the text messages, then switch them into maps, and then they had to go back into the app again. So there was too many things going on. I like the idea of interrupting the process of it, and we built that into it on purpose, which we can talk about. But what we did definitely do is take away all the specific places, because we realise what's more important is about helping people go into a state of mind and an ambient state of being, which means that they will find their own extraordinary places and make their own amazing connections between things. We just have to help them get into that state of mind. So that's what makes it specific. People's own engagement with the place and their freedom to wander helps people be more like an artist, have an artist kind of experience, and help complete the work, which is partial. Are you following me?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very different approach to this idea of placemaking or geolocative storytelling than, say, products like Detour or My Tours, which is a stock standard kind of app out there on the market, where you would say this story is going to pertain to this spot, this story pertains to this spot. You stop here, you listen, or you can move, but it's calibrated for movement. Whereas your story sort of allows people, I guess, the generality of being able to walk wherever they want to, while at the same time they're sort of immersed in a kind of an encyclopedia of sounds and stories around cemeteries.
Yeah, it's like it's because of these things, these headphones. It's like always this layer of a reality that's on top of your visual reality. So there's the sonic layer, which is quite separate to what you're actually, where your body is and where your eyes are and what you're feeling and things. And I think that if you make too strong a connection, you sometimes risk forcing things. And so for me, it's about or risk making people feel like they're being led too much. Whereas this one is literally, this work, Vanitas, is about wandering, and is about wandering and wondering at the same time, and having an experience of being held, but also open enough to be able to wander wherever you like. So if you see something over there that you like, you can just go there and look at that for a bit. And the work also interrupts itself, so it stops every so often. So there's space between the episodes where you can just take your headphones off and sit for 15 minutes or take a photo. But also the use of text messages from outside the app are designed to like interrupt your flow a little bit. So you go, oh, now where am I? I've been listening to this thing for 10 minutes. Now I can take my headphones off and, oh, how did I get here? I'm a bit lost. You know, where might I go next? Or, oh, look at this thing I've just discovered. It's really, I just feel like I'm having an encounter with something extraordinary. Yeah. So and that was a surprise for us. We didn't expect to go in that direction. We expected to give people very specific instructions. But actually, the more instructions we gave people, the more stressed they became. And actually, we wanted people to sit within the work and move between different modes of perception.
And you've got very safe experiences, I think, with cemeteries too, because they're places of repose. Cars aren't driving quickly. They're easy places to kind of walk. I mean, they're highly bureaucratic spaces in some ways too. Like I was talking to Tim, who was there in Caloundra, and he was saying that there was a strong, there were strict limitations on the number of people who you were able to have wandering around at any one time.
Yeah, that's right. It's all of those things. It's a fascinating space for people. It's a space that people don't normally get to go to, so they feel privileged to be there and privileged to go there without having to be connected to the normal rituals that take place there, or even having to visit. You know, feeling like you might be visiting someone. But like you say, they're also contested spaces, and you have to be sensitive to the multiple uses that people have for them. And different cemeteries in different places are more open or closed to having art experiences inside of them. And even though Vanitas is very quiet and internal piece, the council there were quite anxious about not offending anybody.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to people not quite knowing what this kind of work is.
Yeah,
it's an unsettled form.
Yeah, I mean, how would you describe it?
Well, I think I've given it I've described it very well so far. I mean, I think this Vanitas, like I say, is like, I call it an artwork for smartphones and cemeteries. It explores both of those things together. But really, it's a third. The other part of that is you as the wanderer, who is engaged with these voices that you hear. Some of them aren't really introduced. There's all these voices going on, including the voices in your own head, and all these voices on these engraved into these stones. You know, that somehow you can hear them. And then there's all these voices of the birds and the trees, and there's all these things going on all around you, and you find yourself in the middle of all those things. So, I don't know, it's a walk, it's meditative, it's a mediated experience, but, you know, the funny thing is about it that there might be a section in the middle where you don't listen to the app or have your headphones on for 10 minutes, and then you go back into it again. And somehow that 10 minutes is appropriated by Vanitas, and it becomes part of Vanitas, you know, which is strange. When people are listening, sometimes they come back at the end and say, I can't believe that you put those flowers just in that place. As I turned around and I saw them, and it's like, oh, we never put those flowers there. But somehow it changes the way people see the world and makes them think that the world is composed for them, in a way. Yeah,
I've been reading a little bit about this recently, where they're testing geolocative stories in public spaces, and I think the upshot of it is that they're saying that there's a real sense of synchronicity in the way in which people's listening experience will often interface with the world around them, whether it's deliberate or not. And you don't need to be didactic about the way you set a story up just to talk about a place. But, I mean, I guess for my part anyway, I feel like audio and place have a sort of a natural marriage. There's something there that I think predates audio-visual stuff, and I think that connecting to the voice and the timbre and the modulation of people's voices and locate that at particular spots, I think is an extremely powerful experience that I think is really timeless in the kind of human condition. So, I don't think that necessarily one's better than the other, because yours is a very generic sort of sound experience, and the work that I'm working with is very site-specific. At the Gunny Wiggle Soundtrail, which we'll be launching soon, there's half a water tank there where two people lived when their kids were both taken away. And, to walk past there and to have some degree of sort of voice that's going on while you're walking through that process is a very powerful moment in time. And I think that, that this geolocative thing it's almost like this kind of new frontier where people like you and I are kind of exploring how you might sort of colonise this and how you actually layer data and stories and experiences across these spaces.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like those stories are already there, and they're just dispersed across different people. And it's, the person who lived in that water tower could come and tell everybody who passes about their story, but they're not going to be there, and they're not going to stay there to tell that story. So, the thing with these media is you can create layers that are more accessible, connect them to a particular place. And that kind of highlights what you might call a spectrality, this idea of almost ghostly frequencies being picked up in a particular place or coalescing around a place and making those visible in a way that might not have been possible in quite the same way before. Yeah. That you can tune into. You need these devices to help you tune into these stories associated with this place. And this is the thing about this listening in the same place that things are made is important, isn't it? It isn't for me, and that makes it feel more spectral somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it discussed as kind of liminal. Instead of it being just about memories and associations, it's also sort of liminal, and that analogy you use between. Sorry, I've just got a lawnmower going on outside. I've just lost my train of thought.
I can't hear it.
Yeah,
that's the eruption of the reel. That's the science speaking to it.
It is. It is. Okay, so do you mind if I talk some sort of a bit of techo stuff here?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so
let's see if I can answer it.
Why did you decide to have, in terms of the wireframing, in terms of how the platform actually works?
Yeah.
Why did you decide to have it both online as a sort of an experience, and also within an app framework? Why did you decide on those two things?
Well, we were making an app. That's one thing we were doing. But we also were making a project that we had no idea what it was. So when we started off, we'd had no idea. We didn't know it was going to be called Vanitas. We just started an inquiry, and we started talking to all these people. So we didn't even know at the beginning that when we were talking to people that those things might end up in exactly that form in the final work. We thought, well, we were recording these things partly just to document the conversations, but it wasn't out of the question that actors might perform those words or that those words would be transformed into something else. So we moved on accumulating all this material. And then we actually have more material than is in both chapter 1 and chapter 2. We've got a third chapter, stuff that might happen at some point. But chapter 1 is us realising that actually we can create this app that is available on the App Store and Google Play for people just to experience at that place participating cemeteries, which say is maybe a couple of thousand people. And the same technology and the same system can also allow anybody in the world to download the same material, which is millions of people, you know. So chapter 1, which is about the same length as chapter 2, is freely available to anyone in the world, and that's 6 episodes of us exploring, visiting people, talking about one particular part of the inquiry, which is into Rachel Royce's Vase with Flowers and the meaning of this painting and whether we can understand the meaning of a painting several hundred years later on or not. And then chapter 2 is taking the language of that interface and that way of working with these found materials and audio interviews, all these images, and taking that to the cemetery. And that has the extra parts of text messages and voice calls and things. But chapter 1 has emails. It sends you emails. I don't know if you understand.
No. I didn't cotton on to that. I mean, I loved the addition of the text messages. I thought that was a really well integrated and welcome break to the kind of intensity of stuff that was going on with the sound mix and the chapters. But I was in a bit of a rush, and I heard about this Vanitas thing going on, and probably was feeling a little bit, oh, what's this? You know, what do they know? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I did download the app and had to do that in a Wi-Fi area where I had good coverage because as I realised afterwards, it was a sizable file. And I sort of did have a look at the website, and I went straight to Wikipedia and checked out the Vanitas pictures from the 1700s, I think it is, isn't it? And was quite intrigued by them and that kind of correlation between what I'm about to go and do as a geolocative kind of experience, as opposed to a sort of an artistic study and a sort of slightly mysterious study, you know, via something online.
Well, yeah, I suppose the idea with part 1 in chapter 1 is like about art and about flowers and about all the things, all the tools that we use in chapter 2, which is at the cemetery, but done in a slightly different way, that's all, and designed to be listened anywhere. So in that part, there's many more images on the screen, and we filled up this, you know, that's why the file's so big. Chapter 1 is full of images, but we took all of those away in chapter 2 because the experience is, for us, it's less about looking at the screen and listening to the audio. It's then about listening to the audio and the screen, the cinematic experience is moving around this cemetery and finding your way around, picking your way through it.
That's right. You're seeing it for yourself. You're experiencing that place with your own eyes, which is, in many ways, you know, with Detour, where their argument was that you don't need to be looking at your smartphone. You want to be engaging with the places and hearing the stories that connect you with those places. And until I'd kind of come across Vanitas, I was really understood the logic behind that. But I do think that the beauty of what you sort of pulled off, particularly with the layering of the images and the very simple to use chapter headings and then the text messaging, it wasn't enough of a distraction to take me away from being in that location.
Well, actually the point is that the text messages do interrupt you, but you're still interrupted within your place, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, it just roughens the experience a bit. And to be honest, they are annoying. They are deliberate. You know, we could have made a system so the text messages appeared in the app, if you know what I mean. But we deliberately didn't do that because of our investigation into, well, what does a smartphone do on its own? It interrupts things all the time. It's terrible in performances. It constantly interrupts. So we use the idea of thinking more of a transmedia experience, and we use the text messages to interrupt the app itself. And that's why it then creates these sensations of talking to somebody and not quite knowing where you're going. And it also makes you not like the person you're texting so much as things go on. It's quite annoying, so the idea of text messages and the interruptions creates the sense of character as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
But it's quite subtle, and it's not to everyone's taste. Yeah. And some people don't like that part. That's the least favourite part of text messages.
I thought it worked really well. I mean, probably I'm not sure it was a disappointment, but something that surprised me once I started doing it, because I met the guys at the allocated site. They said, I won't go into it, I don't want to spoil too much, but I went through the process, and then I started getting the text messages, and I thought, what the hell's going on here? But probably the thing that surprised me most was that it was a generic sound-based app that doesn't speak to any one location in particular. It's speaking to the thematic area. And I really like it. I think it works. And I think the expectation that I came with, particularly in a cemetery, which is such a rich sort of cultural site, of stories of people's lives, of legacies, of entire generations, that the expectation is that you're going to get someone or some voice or some sort of kind of connection with these lives and stories and memories and family connections. And that surprised me.
Yeah, and I think it's the other feeling of that, just making me think about it, as you say, is it's also about it's obviously about giving space for the visitor to consider all these things in their own time. So while Jason and I are going through the cemetery and in the audio and having our encounters and talking to people and also talking to each other about life and death and things, the person who's quiet or having their own thoughts in relation to our thoughts as we're talking is in that place, looking around, thinking about life and death, and wondering whether they themselves are a ghost in that place. We are all like ghosts. We travel to those places and then we're gone again. We have some experiences, we have some memories, and we take those with us, and we're just passing through. We all kind of know that, but helping people be in that position where they can be have a strong relationship to place and to voice and to their own thoughts and to themselves and to their own fleetingness that's the rare thing that works like this can do to people. Put them in a position to think about that.
Now, can I talk about your relationship with the developer without us treading on anything too sensitive here? Because for me, I think the issue between people who are building these types of experiences and their ownership around the product that they're working with is really integral in terms of, I suppose, for the lack of a better word, sort of the democratization of kind of geolocative space. And if you're working with a formula platform where maybe you're one, bookshelf on the whole sort of, bookcase, then you're working within a framework that's designed by someone else. You're not designing your own framework. Whereas with Vanitas, I think what you've got is a product that's working really solidly with the experience that you've built. And I think that's really impressive. But that's a complex business. Developers are not cheap.
No.
And developers are not necessarily very creative. And the ability to get it as smooth, I think, is what you've done. I think is really, you pulled something off. But can I ask you, in terms of sort of the ownership over this, how's that sort of split here?
Well, it's a really interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. So we've worked with an amazing developer called Chris Haywood, who is an independent programmer. He's actually moved to Holland now, but I would certainly recommend him for anybody who's interested in these things. And he has made several projects in the arts, but also is a pretty amazing programmer who makes his real living through working in programming. And he was interested in working with the Unity platform, which is what our app is made in. which has some benefits in terms of speed in which things can be developed and a kind of platform independence in terms of Google or Apple. And then we also worked with, so the key team was a graphics team, the programmer, and Jason and I as the artist, and Rob Jordan as the sound artist. And between those people, we were able to create the skin and the look and feel and the concept for the app that then Chris was able to implement. But it was one of those things where we had to make a guess at a certain point what we wanted. It was, like there always is, a big kind of flurry of possibilities. And then we thought, well, we've got all this audio, we've got all these images, let's really limit our palette to the relationship between audio and image and try and use those compellingly to create what we discovered, or what we think we call it, it is an illuminated podcast. So it's like an illuminated text. So you really, the images are often there for minutes. Some of them are only the quickest we can change an image, I think, is every 5 or 10 seconds. I can't remember what it is there. But that's quite a long time for an image. That's the language, audio and stills. We talked about video, we talked about all kinds of other things, but it's stills and audio. And then the other part of the app is a transmedia system which sends emails, text messages, and voice calls. That we were using an off-the-shelf option for that before, but now we've since developed our own system which is a lot easier to use, which we trialled for the first time in Queensland. Yeah, we hadn't actually used that before. And that meant we could have 2 versions of Vanitas happening simultaneously. So at the same time as in Queensland, it was in Melbourne. And it's the transmedia system that controls all that. So there's an app and then there's a server system. Yeah.
So just to be clear, so you're using what they call a Unity platform. What's the Unity platform?
Yeah, Unity is is it called Unity? Yeah, it's called Unity. It's like one of the major platforms for games developers. You can make anything in Unity really, from games for your PlayStation to phone games to PC games. And it does all kinds of fancy things. I don't really know that much about it. But that's the kind of animation platform that the Vanitas app runs on. And it can be used to create anything, and I suppose most of the time it's used to create 3D run-aroundy kind of things, shoot 'em ups. But this one, it creates a very simple. There's basically 2 parts to this app. There's the Bars with Flowers interface, and then there's the episode interface. And the episode interface is a timeline that actually used to scroll, so you could see that it was a timeline more. But if you pause it, you can still scroll through, but now it does fades from photo to photo, image to image. So there's just two modes. That's all we could afford, really. So one really nice animated introduction part, which creates that sense of suspended time, which is quite important for this work. And that could be in a moment out of time, like a still life. And then this, for each of the flowers in the interface, that's an episode.
Yeah. So who owns what here?
That's a good question. So Jason and I own the app, but I think Chris, we don't see it as a product that's going to be used for anything else.
Yeah.
It's not really like it can be used. We can add more episodes and take things away. And I think Chris, I wouldn't have any say the hell between Chris, Jason, and I. Chris has just done so much work on it. Yeah, I would say that. We're not really. It's not it's not like a for-profit product. You know what I mean? It's an artwork.
Right.
And we don't have any intention to make any more. If we did ever get some more funding, and we ever wanted to go back into this project we've been working on for 3 years, we would probably do chapter 3, which is a whole other story, and a pursuit of another void at the centre of the story. So both of the stories are about this an unknown void at the centre of an inquiry that we're trying to find out about. In chapter 1, it's about the centre of the vase with flowers picture, and in chapter 2, it's about this figure who's what is this? Who's delivered these flowers, or who's this person who's delivered these flowers, and what do they mean? And everything else spins around these things.
But Rob, you could take that configuration and you could place it into a different context and find a story that could be different but equally as rich. And it might not be cemeteries, but it could be kind of coastal kind of culture around beaches, or mining communities and some sort of unsolved kind of riddle that goes in. I don't know. I can't think. But you could
That's
use
true.
you could use this framework.
You could change what the image is on the first screen, and you could have another image with hotspots that you can zoom in on, and then tell stories in that way. You could. That's true. It would just be. It's just we've not thought about that. It's one of those things where you work on something for so long, and actually, as you can tell from the content in it, it was through a traumatic process in our lives. But you could turn it. You could have another load of stuff, and we really enjoyed making it, and we like this kind of non-fiction narrative style. But at the moment, we don't have any intention to do that. And there would still be considerable costs involved in that,
And I suppose here we kind of come to a bit of a bugbear of mine, is that a lot of these projects seem to be kind of one-off, transitory projects that are around sort of exploring this field. Whereas for me, working with Soundtrails, what I feel like is both my honour and also my sort of, I'm lumped with, is I feel like I want to make sure that these stories don't disappear, because I've worked very closely with people who I think otherwise their stories, their lives, their communities just are completely off the radar. And I think it's a great way for people to engage with these communities and these stories, particularly with Aboriginal communities that are so marginalised.
Completely, absolutely. I mean, those things are all true. However, because I'm from a theatre background, I'm used to things disappearing as soon as I've made them. And even if you make an amazing platform, these things, we're talking about digital media, it's ephemeral in its nature. We can hold on to things for a while, and then unless we transform them, unless you're going to carve them into stone, like the gravestones in the graveyards that I've been working with, they're going. Or unless you translate them into living culture like First Nations Australians did and held on to stories for 40,000 years, to a certain extent, all of these prototypes are all new ideas for doing things. And unless you create a YouTube or a major thing. So I suppose I'm not... So this Vanitas will only work for a few years, because we won't be able to update and maintain the software forever. And these are about data legacy issues and digital archives, and these are known issues, but I'm not too worried about it.
It's a luxury you've got, and you've got an incredible creative canvas to play on for a while, and no doubt when this falls over, there'll be something that you can move forward with again. I think it's terrific, but I suppose there is that question of for me, place and stories and people's relationship to those places and stories are so important. And I come from a radio documentary background, and I come from an oral history background, and there's that issue of, well, what happens with this? What's the legacy for this, and where does it go? And I think that's why the issue between the creative production side of things and the actual ownership and the mechanics of the platform are really interesting, because I don't think it's really that possible for creative projects, if they're trying to do a legacy experience, to both be doing the production and also to be doing the R&D and the maintaining with the operating systems of the platform. I think it's too much. So you're going to have to somehow get on the back of another platform and see that they're able to do those operational updates and hope that they can sort of function in the way that you want creatively. And for me, that's a big question.
And that's a big question. I suppose the answer is about a spectrum of things. And the thing with Vanitas is, there was no platform for it, so we had to invent it. But we also didn't know what we wanted to be in the platform before we started working on it. And the point is that it's not just the app, but it's about the experience of being at a place and listening, and it's the text messages, and it's the emails. And that can't really be captured in any... That's why it's like a performance for me. That's why I think of it like a performance.
Yeah.
But that's fine. And then so that's one end of the spectrum. But then as you go down the spectrum, where we could store or maintain the content of the audio, for example, in a particular way. And the graveyards are doing fine at looking after themselves a bit. Some are more dilapidated than others. And then the text messages, the epistolary of it, text messages and the emails are ephemeral anyway. So, but they're kind of really important to understand for the bigger idea of what the experience is we're trying to create. But, but the idea of archiving community voices, or the role that radio plays, is slightly different, and that's the other end of the spectrum, I'd say. In terms of the archiving of oral history and that kind of project is something slightly different again, which, if you create a wonderful archive, can be then used in lots of different ways and different forms. Like, we've got all these recordings and all these different public domain images in our work, but the only reason we can have those in is because there's all these public domain images. Do you know what I mean? So, this Vanitas is maybe a crystallization of lots of different media into one place at one time, for as long as it can exist, like a person, as long as it exists, as long as it can hold it together, and then it will go again back into the ether.
Great stuff. Now, I'm mindful of time. We've got 5 minutes left before you better head off. I just wanted to ask, what are the sort of the main influences for you in this geolocative area, this geolocative app area? What have you been informed by and inspired by?
Well, I suppose that's a good question. I think I've made my first audio tour. I don't mediate it. So because I come from a theatre performance world, Janet Cardiff is obviously very important to me. And I've also made audio works since the early beginning of the millennium in different modes, in different galleries and things. But I've always kind of been on and off with them. And then I also made a work called Alma Mater, which is a video, follow film video, which is for different, a museum and for a touring work. And so it's been an ongoing thing for me. I mean, I find Jason's Mailing's work, who I worked with on this, very influential in terms of his work, Fugue State, which is it's quite an interesting work that takes place in Masonic halls, where you listen in a particular way to these notes, and you wander around and move, and depending on where your relationship is, you hear different things. It's very interesting work.
It's almost like a precursor to 3D sound, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it was. It had some problems, and you'd be an interesting person to talk to about that. They had some real problems with the technology then, because they were using Bluetooth, but it was tricky. But then, like Duncan Speakman's work, don't know if you know, I've been engaged in ambient literature. You've read about that. I think I said you think about that. They're doing some really interesting things, but of course they think about it as literature.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about the expanded book, but it's really about people moving out with headphones on. And let me just think of some other things. There's also, this isn't quite geolocative. None of these ones I've actually spoken about are quite geolocative, but Duncan Speakman's work, some of that is, which is very interesting. But there's also a group called French Mottershead in the UK. They've done these beautiful audio works about death and the ways that the body decomposes. One for a boat, one for woodlands. They're bringing one to Australia about bushland. So they're basically 20-minute or so audio works where you lie very still in a particular place, or on a boat floating or in the woodland, and listen to a very detailed description of what happens to your body if it were to die in that place. So there's something very interesting, performative about that. I'm just trying to think of some other key audio works. So it's more in that realm. If I think of any more, I'll send them through to you. But I think those are the most contemporary ones that I'm thinking about. Then I suppose there's podcasts, which is a slightly different thing. But actually, I'll listen to while people are moving a lot. People listen to podcasts while they're moving. So the way that they listen to other things while they're moving is informed by how people hear podcasts. So Vanitas, even though it's not a podcast, is heard like a podcast because it's delivered in the same way. So it's inescapable comparisons to podcasting.
And it's linear audio, which you could just download and listen to.
That's
anyway.
right.
It's not pertaining to those sites and those stories.
But like we were saying, those things, you make a connection to them somehow.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I sometimes feel like all my friends who are in podcast land must get sick of me because I'm always banging on. But I think that the geolocative auditory experience is a much richer canvas, I think, for the listening experience than podcasts are. And I don't think many people have cottoned on to that yet.
No. I think there's still some complicating factors like linearity, like limitation. This geofencing or whatever, it limits as well as it opens up. So you do have to go to a place which takes away however many people could listen to it. And things like being able to fade between the sound that's located in one place and the sound in another place because you walk between the two places. That's still really difficult to do, for example, and could be really interesting.
No, it's not. We work with two different sound levels, and we've kind of programmed it so it'll fade down. We've got background sounds and primary sounds. You only see a part of it when you actually look at the Soundtrails app, and admittedly, it is an app which needs a rebuild, which we're hoping to do pretty soon. But that's not a big issue. I think the real skill for when you're using GPS, which is primarily the mover and shaker here, because beacons, to my knowledge, are still arbitrary. They're still problematic. And things like transformers and stuff start getting very expensive. But I think when you're using GPS, the issue, I think, for me is how you modulate stories across time and place to allow flexibility, but also to be site-specific. And to factor in, that someone might dawdle or someone might be quick, and to give it a sense of a rounded experience within that framework. Yeah.
I think if you tie it into another thing that's quite interesting is when people tie it into like the pedometer in the phone, for example. So like those zombie run games and those that aren't actually geolocated, they're based on you moving, literally moving. I think there would be interesting combinations there, which is combining that technology with another technology within the phone. Yeah. But in a way, say it's a similar problem to what with augmented reality, and something I'm working with at the moment is the problem of GPS located augmented reality figures, of which there are only one because they're in a particular place that's connected to a GPS location, so it can only be seen in a certain place, like the things we're talking about can only be heard in a certain place. And the specificity of the, how many meters do you have to be close, and what's the what's it called?
What are the radius for the sound fields?
Yeah, and how precise is that? And is it the same on all phones? And all of these things are still tricky. But it doesn't mean that they're not creative things.
I'm not sure about that. I think it's really getting very tight.
Right.
With that thing, and I think Calvium are probably doing it very well in the UK. I think Calvium are involved in ambient literature, if I'm right.
Okay.
And I think we pretty much got that down. When we started using beacons, we were all over the place in terms of phones and operating systems and stuff. We just kind of gave them up. But GPS seems fairly stock standard now. It's not too tricky to use, and it's pretty reliable. And we also have our stories which are cached on a website, so you can kind of use that as an education resource, which kind of gives me the shits in some ways, because I don't want to take away from that in situ experience. It's much more rich, being on site. But for the sake of, say, for instance, communities that have got, a lot of Aboriginal kids who might be in those Soundtrails, their voices are in there. They're just over the moon by the fact that they can go in, their schools can go in, and they can kind of check out these stories. But I think that doesn't necessarily take away from the beauty of the sound production. And I think that the formula that you've hit on, I think, works really well. And that was the reason primarily why I wanted to do an interview with you, because it furthers my kind of understanding as to how different people are approaching this area, and it suggests a whole new approach to these things. But I think the body of knowledge out there from me is very limited still. It's very, very sort of nascent. And I think that for communities or artists or whoever who wants to sort of explore this media and to do it in a half-informed way, I think these sorts of conversations are very useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, what a great thing. Well, thanks for inviting me to speak about it.
You're the first cab off the rank.
You what, sorry?
You're the first cab off the rank.
Oh, great. Well, the thing is, there's so many people working in this area, but everyone's in the same position of trying to figure it out. So anything that can go to help people with that's great.
That's dead right. Yeah. So look, thank you very much. I really appreciate that opportunity. And
nice to meet you in what's it called, in virtual land.
Now, shall I just switch this recording off, and you and I can have a talk about the mechanics of this? Okay, I'm just going to switch this recording off.